Imagine you're a 7-year-old and you go to elementary school. The school is a very important part of your life, of your everyday life, of your world. That's where you go and meet with your friends. That's where you play. That's where you go and learn new things. It's your place to belong. Now imagine you're being told your school is going to close. Why? The reasons are beyond your understanding. The adults in charge of the schools from the city are saying there's not enough money to keep them open. There's not enough students occupying the schools, that you and your classmates are not as good as students in other schools. Your parents, your teachers, your principal, they're worried. They're stressed. They're angry. Imagine what would you feel? This happened to over 13,000 students in 50 Chicago public schools in May of 2013. Now let's fast forward. It's 2024. Now you're a teenager, a senior in high school. Imagine what would you feel if you have to walk by and see your old school boarded, lifeless, for 10 years. That's more than half of your life. So what could be alternative ways, processes, in which these closed schools can transition into their new life? How can we think beyond closure and imagine what are the possibilities for the spaces to become full of life and vibrant again? And how can we do this centering community voices? Today, I want to take you on a journey to reflect, to see, to reimagine how closed schools can become part of neighborhood life again, and to think, what are the possibilities for these spaces to become full of life and vibrant once again? How all of us can be active advocates for design justice. And how can we do this using art, design, and architecture? When I started working in this project in 2016, I remember thinking, how is it possible that something like this could happen in a city like Chicago? Come on. It was very intimidating to even think I could have a contribution to an issue of this magnitude. But I did have a few hats to wear. As a researcher, as a creative, as a planner, as a storyteller, I remember thinking, it's very important that we document these processes in which the schools are going to be transformed. So this is some of the early work that we started doing in the studio, documenting, learning about these places. But I also knew I had to educate myself about a few things. I spent a lot of energy inventorying, tracking, researching each one of the schools. Each one of the schools has a very important story to tell. I also learned some of them were immediately repurposed. The majority of them were put out for sale. And I know that until last year, 26 of them, more than half, are still closed. I've talked with and connected with a lot of community members, listened to their stories, their experiences. And I also learned how segregation and racism has impacted these communities. I learned that closed schools was just the tip of the iceberg of deeper inequities impacting Black and Brown communities in Chicago for decades. Let me share a little bit directly from the voices of community members from an upcoming documentary film we're working on. We have invested in documenting these voices because we believe it's very important to share the stories as part of healing and reimagining processes.
As far as we know, it's the biggest mass closing in U.S. history.
By and large,
These closures affected Black children. 88%, 89% of that 13,000 kids that were affected were African American.
I felt 2013 was some of the most disgusting political agenda that hurt Black people that I had ever personally seen. There were parents who said, if you do this, children are going to suffer, and they still did it.
When a school closes, it's not just the school that closes. I mean, many times a school is an anchor, right, for a community.
And what was specifically traumatizing was the process of closure. It felt like a government that was here to squash you.
Those school closures to date still impact folks as if it was yesterday, and that was 10 years ago.
What we kind of came away from after this investigation was that this was very clearly a failure.
I learned it was not a coincidence that these closed schools were located in the west and the south side of the city. This racial dot map from the city with population from 2010 show us in green and orange colors where Black and Latino communities are concentrated. Surprise, in the west and the south side. So the location of these closed schools was not merely an administrative decision either. It was a manifestation of systemic injustice. And this injustice was designed and implemented over decades through disinvestment, displacement, and racist policies. Imagine 3 million square feet of building space, over 100 acres of land, vacant all of a sudden, distributed across 25 neighborhoods. It was not only the numbers that were daunting, it was the fact that these places, once full of life with students and teachers and parents and staff and neighbors, were now boarded, vacant, lifeless. One thing was clear to me. Addressing this number of closed schools was going to take a tremendous amount of energy, effort, resources, but also it was going to take a lot of creativity and imagination. So how do we repair harm? How do we heal while allowing ourselves to imagine what could be the next life of these buildings? Tough question, huh? Feeling both overwhelmed and motivated by the scale and the complexity of the issue, I lean into what I know best: design. Design allows me to think in multiple ways. One of them is thinking, how can we connect people, processes, places? But one of the things that I love the most about design processes is realizing our capacity to envision new connections, futures, and possibilities. Also to reclaim our power as agents of change. As an urban designer, I was trained to have the solution, the answer to a problem. I did not have a solution for this. Then I thought, well, if I don't have an answer, like every designer should have, I might as well ask a question. My question was, how might art, design, and architecture could create more inclusive and equitable processes to repurpose our closed schools? My instinct for this journey has always been to connect with community, to work with the community on the ground, to listen to their stories, their ideas, their aspirations, their dreams, but most of all, to create space to have community conversation. And this is very important because that's where we share, shape, and tell our own stories. This was one of the first installations that we did, and that's how Creative Grounds took shape. As a community-led initiative focused on reimagining the future of closed schools, we use art, design, and architecture to bring visibility to this inequity, but also to spark collective imagination about the future of social infrastructure in our city. Creating moments like this, where we have a large-scale map of the city of Chicago in a parking lot of a closed school, was an excuse not only for gathering, but it was a tool for reflection. And it was a moment of collective action and imagination. I've followed closed schools for 8 years now. I've been humbled to learn and listen and be inspired by the work of so many community leaders that are stepping into this issue. I'm particularly excited about 3 redevelopment projects that are being led by community organizations in Brownsville, and Inglewood, and Austin. And it's very exciting for me to learn on how these places, these closed schools, are becoming of service to their communities again through spaces for entrepreneurship, for local businesses and organizations to have a place to thrive, through affordable housing and access to healthcare services, and also for places for work that support workforce innovation. I've learned about their challenges. I learned about their setbacks, but I also learned about their wins. But most of all, I learned about their belief in community self-determination to reclaim and activate these community spaces. Let's hear a little bit of the reflections.
How can a young person in this community feel good about their community if they walk by a closed school for 10 years?
It's not like there was a lineup of projects and proposals for what to do with abandoned schools, and all of our community organizations were willing to take on the task.
Well, this is happening in other states. People are repurposing schools with community leading the process. It can happen here.
If we start to work together and think about what we have rather than what we don't have, I believe that we have the ability to do some really great things.
Yes, this is a great loss to our community, like so many other things, but how do we turn this loss into an actual win?
Why shouldn't we be bold? Why shouldn't we be ambitious? Wasn't redlining bold? Wasn't, restricted covenants bold? Wasn't it bold to close 50 schools? These moves, these decisions, they've been bold decisions made by people in power. So obviously, community needs to be bold as well in order to reclaim what is ours.
As you can hear from these voices, designing for self-determination requires from us to take a stand, to be courageous, to be bold, but it's at the end of the day designing for resistance and collective action. What is also clear is that we can design more just pathways to repurpose these closed schools, and we can do so by centering community voices. This journey connected me with Overton, a closed school in Brownsville, a neighborhood in the south side of the city. Overton, like many other schools, has transferred from public to private ownership. And it was the beginning of thinking, well, if these buildings are going to take some time to get redeveloped, what can we do in the meantime to keep them alive and connected with the community? One of the first things that happened when the schools closed was that the names of the schools were removed physically from these buildings. So we wanted to reclaim that identity, and we started by telling the story of the school. The school was named after Anthony Overton, a Black entrepreneur, a business and civic leader from the early mid-20th century, who also happened to come up with the name Brownsville as a neighborhood, also known as a Black metropolis. He established numerous businesses, even a local newspaper, and even a national bank to provide financial services access to Black communities. We had to share that story, come on. We also learned that Overton was designed and built in the 1960s. And one thing that was very exciting about it is that it was designed thinking about the future of education and how spaces and buildings can contribute to a more stimulating learning experience. Lots of lighting, lots of transparency, lots of openness. Building on the legacy of Overton and being inspired about the future of community spaces for learning and exchange has inspired how we shape so many projects, so many activities, anything from community markets, art projects, design installations, workshops, performances, asphalt murals. Overton has been the landscape of designing every activity that you can think of so far, but also has been the place to connect hundreds of neighbors, artists, students, to make space together, while this space awaits to become the Overton Center for Excellence. Overton is the beginning of imagining how our closed schools can be transformed and bring back to life with the community and by the community. Through this work, I met a lot of young people, a lot of neighbors that have been willing to work with us, to collaborate with us, to spend their energy and bring so much joy and care and love for these spaces. I believe there's a big opportunity to think about closed schools as spaces in transition and investing resources and energy in keeping them alive and connected and active in a time when they're waiting to becoming something new. Closed schools should be incubators for imagination instead of reminders of trauma. I believe as designers, we have a big opportunity here. I think we can all become advocates for design justice. The mass closing of schools in Chicago presented a challenge larger than any individual, than any single organization or agency can address. And this is not unique to Chicago. This is happening in other places, in other cities, in other communities. But it offers us the opportunity to reimagine our approach to designing with community, to designing for justice, to designing for a future with the transformative power of collective action. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.